Hi everybody, thank you for joining in. We're going to have another session today on Out of Mind and Journeys of Self-Discovery. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Dr. Itisha Nagar and I do these sessions every Wednesdays and Fridays. The idea behind Out of Mind is to pick up topics that are lesser talked about in our society. And the reason why I chose this title Out of Mind was because I generally try to bring in participants in this session who have been at the receiving end of the statement, are you out of your mind? So I do believe that when you are in quotes out of your mind, then being out of your mind, you can actually it can become a place for your own self-discovery, and that's the theme of these sessions that I have now. In case you've not seen these sessions before, I've put them up on my YouTube channel. So in the last 2 weeks, we've talked about sexual fluidity, we've talked about self-harm, we've talked about bipolar disorder, and we've talked about coming of age experiences. And today I'm going to be bringing up another very interesting topic for discussion. Thank you next beyond trans visibility. So for people who are just joining in, we're going to have a very special person, a very special guest amongst us, who's going to be talking about transgender experiences. Now, I remember we were doing this session on sexual fluidity and Samaj, where Chaitanya, who was a guest here, so he said that even though today LGBTQI community in general is stigmatized, in general people don't know what LGBT means, but even amongst all these amongst LGBT, people still understand lesbians, people still understand what being gay is, but transgender community in general is out of all those, out of the entire rainbow spectrum, the transgender community is the one that is most misunderstood. And that is why I thought that it would be very informative for us to understand what being transgender means. Is it an illness? Is it just someone who's confused about his or her gender identity? What is it that makes us keep transgender population out of the our workplaces, our schools, even our homes for that matter? And so for that, to answer some of these questions, I have with me Miss Alexandra Chandra. So Alex is someone who came. Alexandra is from New York. Now she came to Kamala Nehru College in 2014 when I had just recently joined the college. So I met Alexandra then, and even though I didn't get enough time to interact with her, but over over the next few years, we kind of kept in touch through social media platforms, and I have seen her transform from Alex to Alexandra, a very beautiful and assertive woman who speaks out and loud about the rights of trans women. So to talk more about Alexandra.
Hi.
Hello.
How are
Good
you?
morning.
Morning over here. How are you?
Very well. Can you hear me fine?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah, just we might just need you to be a little louder, probably close to your laptop. That might be
Sure, sure.
better. Yeah. Yeah. I hope you're all. I mean, if the viewers can't hear us, just let us know. Right. So, how are you doing, Alexandra?
I'm doing well. It is 9:30 here. I'm in Brooklyn, New York, so the sun is rising. It feels okay. I'm awake and I'm ready to talk about trans rights and trans visibility. And I really want to start by saying that I missed you. I know that we really didn't get to
Oh.
connect that much when I was like a student for a brief moment at KNC, but I always admired your willingness to want to bring some of the most marginalized folks into the center of the circle. and to also have us speak from our experiences. It's nice to know that professors like you are experiential. You're willing to honor lived experiences as a wellspring of important knowledge, whereas other professors are still very much by the textbook. I feel like
Right.
honoring lived experiences of those folks who have the lives you're curious about and are very contested and up for debate, and so I appreciate that. So I did want to name that now.
Thank you so much, Alexandra. Thank you so much for those warm words. You really make my day. I wouldn't have it any other way. That's why I've started these sessions, because from the horse's mouth. That's how I see it. I don't get to take away anyone's lived experience and kind of translate it into what I understand. So, Alexandra, I think you're a little inaudible. That's the comment that's come. So, can something be done about that?
Yes, let me try figuring it out. Here we go.
Maybe if you have earphones or speakers or something like that.
Is this better?
Just that bit. Yeah, can you? Yeah.
Is this better?
Hello. Slightly better. But yeah, I think we can do with this. In case, let us know if this doesn't be. Yeah, I think much better. Yeah. Yeah. So, Alexandra, why don't we start with you telling us what all you've been up to since you came down to Kamala Nehru College,
Yeah.
all the interesting stuff that you've been doing?
So I'll start also by saying that my journey really was impacted by the fact that I was a student at KNC for about a semester. I joined the college for a semester, I believe in July of 2014, and
Right.
till November or October of 2014, right around the time exams were happening. And I was in the psychology department, but I didn't present as how I felt, right? So I presented
Right.
more masculine, but definitely felt more feminine. And I think it was nice. I was outwardly queer and homosexual and gay at
Mm-hmm.
that time.
Mm-hmm.
It was nice to feel included in an all women's college. And
Right.
in that space, though, I feel like a lot of my feminist energies were really recalibrated. And I felt that you all were doing more intersectional activism work, even on a college campus in Delhi, India, than I was doing back home in
Right.
US. So I felt that for me, I was politicized, I will say, a lot of the time at KNC, and I was a new, more radical perspectives and frameworks for my learning were incorporated because of KNC. So a lot of who I am was because of my experience at KNC. I'll say that as well. But since
Right.
leaving KNC, a lot of the research that I had done had been on aging. And aging is really an
Right.
topic of conversation for me, particularly because trans people age like any other person would, but
Hmm.
because of
Hmm.
societal factors, right, our unfortunately lifespan is not determined by our biology, but around societal oppression, right? So, for example,
Hmm. Hmm.
trans women, especially trans women of color, have a lifespan of only 35 years. And partly that is because of hospitalizations, murders,
Wow.
suicide, all these factors that really impact the life course that is not determined by the cellular biology, right? So what I'm interested
Hmm.
in is how do we age as trans people? Because for a lot of what we know, trans people are not allowed to age. We're not allowed
Hmm.
to exist, period. But then age is another privilege. So I
Hmm.
so it's important for me to mention on the on social media that I'm 25, partly also because trans people aren't being archived properly. So that's another issue,
Hmm.
is that misrepresentation is a big part of our community. Whenever we are
Hmm.
reported, we're misgendered in the process. So
Hmm.
we're seeing a lot of trans women, being either murdered or deaths, a lot of times too, they're being recorded as a gender that they were assigned at birth but are not any longer. So I very
Hmm.
want to make sure that my age is captured, and I'm glad we're doing this because it's on social media so folks can also tune in, but also just knowing,
Right.
like, for archival purposes, trans people are not really recorded accurately. And that's important in psychology as well, partly because a lot of the
Mm.
work that psychologists do and academics do is archive and record information and, you know, figure out how to incorporate us into the archive. So this is
Mm-hmm.
work.
Mm-hmm.
But since leaving KNC, aging had been a really big part of my
Mm.
research,
Right.
especially on trans people and myself, and how trans people just age and how our life courses manifest because we were not given any idea or framework to work from, you know, around what a life course for us trans people could be like. So
Mm-hmm.
essentially,
Mm-hmm.
we're splitting our own futures. Every day, I'm
Right.
having to figure out how am I going to wake up? What am I going to do? How
Mm.
does this react to me? What does it mean to,
Mm.
you know, embody womanhood? What does it mean to be my own mother and mother myself? Because my mom was
Mm.
wanting me to grow up as a boy growing up, so she instilled in me values of manhood.
Mm.
But
Mm. Mm. Mm.
and I never felt like that. I'm having to learn how to like mother myself. I'm learning how to be my own
Right.
mother, to take care of my
Right.
child, to meet my own needs, to
Right.
find my own woman.
Right.
That's something I wasn't given or inherited, right? Because
Yeah.
a lot of
Yeah. Yeah.
Western frameworks, what we inherit is what we're passed down from our parents, which is a very colonial
Right.
concept. But for me, my inheritance
Right.
is coming from myself or from my ancestors that I actually never really met. So I have to figure out
Mm.
how to inherit what I don't know. And that's really challenging. So part of
Right.
my work since leaving KNC and going to
Mm.
college and coming to New York has been around this type of work, around trans activism,
Mm.
around also
Mm.
figuring out who I am as an individual. What does it mean
Mm.
to
Mm.
age as a woman? I'm like, what is going on with my body? And how nowadays, now it's like, what do I know about my former gender, right? Now that I'm
Mm. Mm.
a woman, what do I know that I didn't know when I was,
Mm.
and it was just really interesting to me to kind of constantly reflect on gender binaries, the differences between
Right.
sex and gender. What does it mean to perform masculinity as opposed to perform womanhood? And then the whole
Femininity.
idea of
Yeah.
third genders or even non-binary people. What does it mean to not
Mm.
be thought of as a gender at all, and to be kind of not just androgynous, but to actively refuse to want to be incorporated into a binary? So I'm neither man
Mm.
nor woman. So I've had all those phases. I think part of me was
Mm.
non-binary
Mm.
for about 2 years after leaving KNC and before coming to the city. I was just really
Mm-hmm.
questioning gender. I was queer, I was gay, but I didn't like he, him pronouns. So it took me a while
Mm-hmm.
to figure out, like, who am I? What do I need to do? What's
Mm.
my purpose? Where do I feel the most comfortable? Who is my community?
Mm.
So all these questions
Mm.
were ones I was asking myself after leaving KNC. So
Mm-hmm.
to sum it up, like, I was very much male presenting at KNC. I was identifying as gay, but also not sure how to in India, right? Because there's a different
Yeah.
context there with
Yeah.
coming
Yeah.
out and legislation
Right.
and people, and it opened
Yes. At that
flamboyant.
time, I think Section 377 was not quashed, right?
Right.
When you were here, 2014, it
Exactly.
wasn't quashed. Yeah. So it was illegal to be homosexual.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of that going on at the time too, and I was like, oh, you know, like I was up for debate in a lot of ways as a gay man back in 2014, and then in 2015, 2016, and part of into 2017, I was like, okay, I'm non-binary, I can't do this any longer. I felt like I grew
Mm-hmm.
out a lot of my facial hair in India to over masculinize myself in hopes that I would not
Mm.
be as gay at all. So I like produced
Mm.
facial hair and was like, okay, I need to man up in a lot of ways.
Mm.
Return to the US, I'm like, this is not who I am. I forced myself to perform a masculinity that is not mine. So then I became
Mm.
non-binary, and then I started my transition back in 2017, 2018, when I realized, like, my goal is
Right.
to just feel the most comfortable in my body, and then to also
Right.
just not care what other people think and how they choose to define me, because the definers are the ones that get to define, not the people who are defined.
Mm.
So I was
Right. Right.
about wanting to define myself for myself, and I'm just happy where I'm at right now, living my life,
Right.
feeling very confident and comfortable. Though there are days where that does not happen, you know, because we all have that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's
Yeah, yeah.
just like I'm feeling very happy and a joy that I never knew I could experience for sure.
That that's wonderful. That's wonderful. I mean, uh, very heartwarming story, and you've kind of made us go through your
Yeah.
KNC and then post KNC phase. And I think I can see that. I can see that you're at a good place, a good content place. So let me just ask you if that's okay with you.
Yeah.
Now in so trans activism in India, I to whatever little extent that I've read and I've heard, it's probably at a nascent stage, or even if it isn't, then perhaps as a someone who's from the public or the masses, I haven't heard much about it. In fact, I learned so much about trans activism from your post that you put
Mm,
out. So
mm,
I'm very sure there are many people out there who till date do not understand the difference between something as basic as sex and gender.
mm,
So I had a student who once wrote that gender is male and female, and sex is what happens between male and female. So
mm.
that that's how they. So there are these many questions that I'm sure listeners, they want to be sensitive, they want to
Sure,
understand.
sure.
But can you help us kind of distinguish between these all these terms: sex, gender, non-binary,
Yeah.
transgender, difference between transgender and transsexual? What does transition, transformation mean?
Yeah.
And then cross-dressing. So
Yeah,
just
sure. Those are
the
all
entire
fantastic
gamut.
questions and
Yeah.
all very still relevant. And I appreciate you asking them in a sensitive manner. And first and foremost, asking my consent to see if this question was even possible. So thank you for that. A lot of people don't choose to do that. And that
Yeah.
makes me happy that you've done that. So for me, when I think about the differences between sex and gender, gender is how I feel, right? It's not something, and feelings are very much excluded from a lot of things, period, right? From like, we're also taught to think our feelings as opposed to think our feelings. So I'm like always processing
Mm.
how I'm feeling as opposed to just naming how I'm feeling, right? So gender is how I
Mm-hmm.
feel. So it took me a very, 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 very long
Mm.
time
Mm.
to actually be able to say, this is how I'm feeling, right?
Mm. Mm.
Inside how I felt is not how necessarily how I was assigned at birth. And that's more my sex,
Mm.
right? My sex is what I was assigned
Mm.
at birth. Now there are folks who are intersex, though there have been like ancestral legacies of intersex folks throughout our history that have been
Mm.
both male and female chromosomes who've like sort of redefined what sex means too, because you can't
Mm. Mm.
born with male chromosomes or female chromosomes at birth. Like you can have both and also have both genitalia. Intersex folks,
Mm.
because of correctional surgeries, have been denied the right to live an intersex life or to just constantly feel
Mm.
sex because doctors want to
Mm.
genitalia, so
Right.
male or male. So for a lot of ways too, sex is a construct because most folks too are born with, you know, both female and male genitalia, but
Mm.
are
Mm.
corrected through surgery to have just one or the other. So again, though sexes necessarily can be reduced because that's what a lot of people do is reduce things to body
Mm.
to whether or not
Right.
it has a male part assigned at birth or a female part assigned at birth. For me, I was assigned male.
Right.
And that was not what I chose because my parents saw
Mm.
parts and the doctor saw my body parts and was like, this person's a male, right?
Male. Right.
Right. So
Right.
growing up, though, of course, I'm socialized to believe I'm male because of a body part that I have. However, growing up,
Right.
I never felt male. I felt always like I wanted to be around women. I felt like
Mm.
I always wanted to embody womanhood. I wore heels very early at an early age. And a lot of people said, oh my God, this person's going to be gay, right? Oh my God,
Mm.
going to be gay. And growing up, I just learned to embody a side of myself that was just not gay. It was more just, I wanted to live my life as a woman because I knew that's who I was. Like, it's just,
Mm.
it's how I felt inside. So when I'm
Right.
talking to a lot of people, transitioning and trans people, gender is how I feel, and sex is again what I'm assigned at birth. It's my
Mm.
biology. It's again my body part, and you know how I've been seen by doctors in the room when I was delivered. And transitioning is a process that some trans people go on. Not everyone
Mm-hmm.
and they're still
Mm-hmm.
very much valid as trans people, and that's a misconception and a myth in our society
Mm.
that to be trans, you have to transition. And that's what sort of the
Yeah.
20 bill in India was having to put at the forefront. That bill was like, you can't be trans unless you have corrective surgery, unless you have gender reassignment surgery. And I'm like,
Right.
you know, not every trans person needs to have gender reassignment surgery. Not every trans person wants gender reassignment surgery. Not every trans person takes hormones. Not every person chooses to transition medically.
Right.
Another misconception is like non-binary people can be trans. Non-binary ways is an umbrella, is underneath the umbrella of the word trans. Transgender is an umbrella word. And underneath the word trans is the word non-binary and third gender. So a lot of people also believe that non-binary is separate from transness. And a lot of non-binary people feel that non-binary is a form of transness. A lot of people go from being what many folks assume is male to female. So from one gender to another gender, but that is still very binary in a lot of ways. Non-binary people are like, I'm trans, but I'm not a male or female. I'm neither. And I say them pronouns. Like, don't even use pronouns with me or she pronouns with me. Use they, them. So what I'm trying to say is gender is how we feel. Sex is like mostly what we're assigned at birth. And then transitioning is a process that people go on, but it's a choice, it's a self-determined choice. I chose medically transition partly because I, you know, and it was a huge decision. It's not an easy decision to take, you know, hormones, change the chemical makeup of my body, and to also change how I appear physically. It's softened my skin. It's had me grow, you know, like breast growth and softened skin and hair growth. And it's just also changed the way I perceive the world, smell the world. You know, it's just, it redistributed fat on my body. So I'm having to like learn how to navigate that. So it's a huge decision as well. And also it's money. So a lot of folks too can access like transitioning in an equitable way. So being said too, you know, trans people can also be lesbians. Like when we're thinking sex, sexual desire and sexual orientation, I identify as a trans woman, but I'm very open about the fact that I am pansexual. So I'm very open to different people, not necessarily their gender, but more about their energy. I'm really attracted to people's energy. I find women very attractive. I find trans women very attractive. I find men attractive and trans men attractive. So my is very much in some ways decolonized. I very much see as attractive and beautiful. And it's about their energy, their personality. I'm also very interested in how they've healed themselves. I feel like a lot of people are still in the process of that and need a partner to figure out that process. And I'm not that person. I've had to do that myself, and I'm respecting other people's journeys by honoring it. But for me, I'm very much interested in the choices people have made to heal themselves, to not bring anger into a relationship. Not that I've caused any anger, but not bring undue anger into a relationship. So for me, sexual desire is a very much interesting part of the way I live my life. And trans people can be gay, can be queer, lesbian, can have all these different identities because it's intersectional. So that's just a quick spiel. I don't want to take up too much time, but that's just kind of like a general idea.
No, I think that it's very important for people to understand because someone has asked if you could clarify sex and sexuality again.
Yeah, so for me, I'll say sex again is based on what folks are signing.
Your biology.
The biology. And sexuality is very much how we determine our desire. What is our greatest desires? The questions I constantly ask myself, because it's not one many people ask themselves either. It's like, what is your greatest desire? And for me, it's to be loved and to know that I deserve to be loved and to belong, know that I deserve to belong. And that, again, who I choose to, you know, find attraction in is not based, again, on appearance. 99.9% of the time, it's based on our conversation, our connection. And that's what sexuality means to me. It's my connection to a person, not necessarily their gender, not necessarily their sex, but more about how I choose to, again, see them as a potential partner. What is our attraction? That is my sexuality. That's how I define it.
Right. Right. Okay. So my next question is, so many people may not know this, but Alexandra has a connection, a deep connection with India.
Yeah.
Alexandra's father is from India, right?
Yes. My father's from India, which means his parents, my grandparents are
Right.
from India. Though most of us, well, not most, some of us live here in the States, in Connecticut, some in New York, some on the West Coast and in Chicago. But a large part of my family still lives back in India. Yeah.
India. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I think you've been aware of Section 377, right? So
Correct.
this is, of course, this was a colonial times era law which made homosexual people, or in general the LGBT community overall, I mean, most people didn't understand what it is, but they just knew that if you are homosexual, then you can be jailed, you can be persecuted. So mostly it was actually used to just persecute queer individuals. Now, after, I think in 2018, and yeah, 2018, this law was quashed,
Mm-hmm.
and after that, I think there is a growing acceptance for homosexual individuals, which means that people have begun to understand what being lesbian or gay is. And by people, I especially mean the older and the more conservative population. But yet, even if there are people who do support homosexual relationships, or there are people who do support women's rights and feminism, and have started understanding what feminism means, but the conversation on trans women, especially, and transgender population, this hasn't. You don't find a lot of support for that till date.
Not at all.
So
No.
not a lot. So can you help us understand what is it that even people who may be supportive of homosexual individuals or women's rights or otherwise find themselves to be woke tend to keep themselves away from, transgender rights?
Yeah, such a good question, right? And I'll say this as well. This is a transnational issue. It's a global issue. It's in India,
Hmm.
but it's also in this country when we saw the Marriage Equality Act, right? Everyone
Right.
was donating and fundraising to ensure that all 50 states legalized same-sex marriage, and it was just a
Hmm.
firestorm of different folks providing different activisms for the gay population,
Hmm.
specifically gay men, right? And lesbian women, but also just predominantly gay men. And then when that was over, and when trans people were trying to acknowledge the rights that we still had, no one showed up, right? All pockets
Hmm.
closed, no donations came out. Everyone just figured that the end to all of this would be marriage equality. That was the beacon of hope.
Hmm.
Once everyone realized that was a possibility, and that possibility had been actualized, no other work needed to be done to provide, support
Yeah.
for other people in the LGBTQIA community. Now,
Right. Right.
my issues with the fact, and this is also just an issue that I've had too for a very long time, is again what you've mentioned, is that the fact that, like, people show up to support lesbian and gay people, and lesbian and gay people show up to support each other for the most part, though there that can be intra-community, friction. No one really shows up for trans people, and part of the reason for me and thinking about that is a lot of what it has to do with gender, right?
Hmm.
Still, because a lot of what gay men and lesbian folks do is still reinforce a cisgendered binary. They're still
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
right? Cis people are different from trans people, and cisgender is a word I'd like to
Hmm.
find because it's important. And cisgender
Hmm.
means like what you were assigned at birth matches how you feel. So if I was assigned, and I was assigned male at birth, and I chose to still feel very male, that would be cisgender. But because I
Hmm.
feel very female and I embarked on a transition, I'm transgender.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
what
Hmm.
it means to say is that a lot of cisgendered people cannot wrap their mind around the fact that transness is a valid identity. A lot of gay
Hmm.
people see trans people going from male to female as uh, a feminizing process that makes
Hmm.
masculinity and patriarchy really confused in a lot of ways. It doesn't feel,
Hmm.
again, we're upholding the systems that were supposed to be there to benefit me as a male.
Hmm.
I was supposed to have all this privilege, and I still do, right, as a trans woman, because I acknowledge that. However, I'm not getting any support from gay men who can't wrap their mind around the fact that transness is valid, because a lot of them believe in the binary. As much as I'm from male to woman, I still don't believe in a gender binary. I don't believe that I have to be what I was born. I can choose choose a gender. I can choose to still be non-binary, and identify with they them pronouns. But a lot of cisgendered gay men, cisgendered lesbian women don't feel to support us because it means not supporting the binary and support binaries. It's what
right.
And again, it's a generational thing. And I'm glad you mentioned the word generation, because when we're talking about aging, we have to acknowledge the fact that people are aging at different ages. That's what life is. So there's different generational knowledge with regards to someone who's in their 60s, as opposed to what historical amnesia looks like for people in their 70s, who believe that people are new, that trans people have never existed before, that trans people are the newest thing to hit the market.
Right. Fashion. Yeah.
That trans people are ancestral. Trans people have been in our history for a very long time, but trans history has been erased. And trans people are dying too. So that doesn't help the fact that trans people can carry on legacies and pass on those legacies to younger trans people, because of, again, the fact that we're not able to live as long. So the fact that 5 is, constantly something, and I'll be turning 26 in a couple of weeks, is a wonderful feeling for me, right? It's also kind of emotional. But again, thinking about why trans people aren't supported by lesbian folks or gay people is a lot of times, again, is because we're not seen as, we're seen not as, how do I put it? As a profitable point, like as a profitable, I would say, investment in a form of activism. We're not valid. We are still very much contested, and our identities are up for debate constantly. And we're not just, it's just, there's a lack of like community. And a lot of what, again, colonialism does is divide and conquer. So even though we're a part of all the LGBTQ community, we're kind of all lumped together, right? And trans people can be like lesbian. And that's the issue, is that lesbian and gay people are more or less identifying based on their sexual orientation. Trans people are based on their gender. And that's also different. Is that like LGBT, yes, we're all lumped together, right?
Yes,
But when I'm thinking of trans people, I can still be a lesbian and be trans.
Yes.
Right? And lesbians can be trans too, but lesbian itself is very much a sexual orientation identifier. Gay, but gay, he's still a man, but he's identifying as gay because that's his sexual attraction. When I'm identifying as I'm identifying as a woman, and my desire still be either gay or lesbian or pansexual or bisexual. I could be a bisexual trans woman. But a lot of people, again, can't wrap their mind around. It's unfathomable that I can be a trans person and still be valid enough as a gay person. Though I've embarked on a transition, I've decided also to refute to be a part of a binary, especially if I was assigned at birth. So that's why I don't support it, especially in the LGBTQ movement, is because our identities and our politics are very much heavily wrapped around the fact that we're gendered and we're, we're working with gender, whereas gay people are working with their sexuality and with their other men. It's hard for us because gender is still very much a construct in our society globally.
Right. I think what's really this insight that you've given me right now, and I think for most people, I'd say this for most people, is that so we do the cisgendered people or the people who are, what do I say, have their they have their regular folks. Let me call them regular folks. So us regular folks, we tend to kind of lump the LGBTQ community together, LGBTQI community together. But you have helped us understand that there's even othering inside the LGBT community. There's a diversity. There's a process of marginalization even inside the marginalized community itself.
Totally.
Actually.
Totally. There's
Yeah,
LGBTQIA, which is asexual, but it can also be
right.
agender, queer, Q, questioning as well. So every acronym, the acronym itself is just so abundant and
Yeah,
capacious, which is beautiful,
right.
and just allows folks to want to self-determine their identity in a lot of ways, to choose for themselves how they choose to identify. Yeah.
Right, right, right. So now I want to take this conversation towards pathologization of
Mm,
queer folks.
mm,
And I want to talk about this. So everyone knows that homosexuality was not only illegal in India, but even sometimes across the world, still is in many countries, of course.
mm-hmm.
But it was also considered to be a mental illness before 1970s, which is when the DSM, third DSM came about.
Right.
And only recently has the WHO declared that transsexualism is no longer a mental disorder. But DSM-5 still has something called the gender dysphoria, which means that when you're the sex that you have at birth and the gender that you experience, if it is inconsistent, then people are going to experience a lot of distress, and we call that to be gender dysphoria. Now, my question is, which I've always felt, that there are many people who experience mental distress because of number of reasons.
Mm,
Okay, it could be that I had a breakup. It could be that I, lost a job. It could also be that my sex does not match with my gender
yeah,
today.
for sure.
Then, but I do not give a different label. I have anxiety, I have depression, no matter where it's coming from. I don't give a different separate label, but I do have a separate label for the transgender community, and I'll call it gender dysphoria.
Mm-hmm.
So, is it really helping provide help, support and help to the transgender community, this label, which is what probably the intention is of DSM, or
Right.
do you think this is just another attempt to um, pathologize queer experiences?
Such a good question. So I'll say that I'll speak from my perspective. I think it's another attempt to pathologize in a lot of ways, partly because I hear what you're saying. We all have distress. We don't talk a lot about, too, how folks who are self-identifying as SPAD also have a lot of
Hmm.
body dysmorphia and gender dysphoria.
Yeah.
Well, not gender, well, sometimes gender dysphoria for sure, and just body dysphoria. There's a lot when, again, you're specifically naming that, and in the US too, if I want to get a surgery, I have to be diagnosed as gender dysphoric, meaning in order to
Hmm.
pursue surgeries in this country, if I wanted breasts, if I wanted gender reassignment surgery on the lower half of
Hmm.
the body, I need to have
Hmm.
paperwork from a therapist that says I'm stressed, I have gender dysphoria. I have to be diagnosed as having gender
Right.
dysphoria, even if I don't. I need to name it in
Right.
order to get a surgery. The same way
Wow.
that in India, with certain bills, you need to have certain criteria met of pathologization
Hmm.
in order to be able to be seen as legitimate. And that's the issue
Right.
I have, is my legitimacy is hinged upon government and doctors and a medical industrial complex that wants to see me as a pathology, which is why
Hmm.
gender dysphoria is valid in trans communities and non-binary people. However, I don't feel like it's a blanket statement. I feel like each person has a dysphoria at a different level, or some
Mm-hmm.
may not have that at all. Some people live in different parts of the country, which bring out more dysphoria than in other parts of the country. I'm in New York. There's a lot of
Hmm.
people here, so I feel lucky and blessed to have a community. The person I'm seeing,
Hmm.
my partner, is a trans person at the moment. So him and he identifies using he, him pronouns. It's nice to be in a relationship with another trans person. And that
Hmm.
helps my dysphoria in a lot of ways too, because it means I'm being around a person who understands the
Yeah.
experience. And that's also the
Right.
issue, is we don't have a lot of people in life who understand the trans
Hmm.
experience, nor validate it to begin with. So when you're
Right.
constantly being invalidated by people, since the time of your birth to the time that you choose to transition or identify as trans, you of course may have some ounce or moments of gender dysphoria, because you're kind of trying to prove the fact that you're still a real.
Hmm.
So I think
Right.
having to acknowledge that and needing to have that on paper as a
Hmm.
measure in order to pursue surgeries to me very much seems colonialist. But yes, I also
Mm.
with it because I do not believe that you should have gender dysphoria in order to pursue surgeries. It should not be the
Mm.
gatekeeper in a lot.
Criteria.
I do think it also is a form of, like you said, pathologization. And we constantly do
Mm-hmm.
that with homosexuality having been in the DSM for a
Mm.
very long time, up until like only recently, to be honest. It wasn't like they
Mm-hmm.
removed it back in the 1800s. It like made its way still into the DSM up until only like 20 years ago, 20, 30 years ago,
Right.
and then it was removed.
Right.
So it
Exactly.
does
Yeah.
take time, but a lot of what the DSM and who creates the DSM are white men, right? We don't,
Hmm.
the people who are creating these yardsticks are not trans people. Like,
Right. Absolutely.
so we have to look at things through a more critical perspective. Our pathologization
Yes.
is being pathologized by people who are not us.
Yes. Yeah. 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 So, I want to take this moment to actually talk about the role of education in all this.
Oh, good.
So I know, I know, in US, I've been reading up how there have been activism for the rights of trans children,
Yeah,
especially, the whole thing about separate washrooms or not, or should you force a trans child to go to a male washroom if she's not comfortable?
right.
And right. And in India, although of course we're still so conservative that trans children, there's no talk about transgender adults, but trans children, again, nothing, zilch. We have no conversation happening there. But colleges are trying to become more open and safe spaces for transgender people. So, for instance, Delhi University started, I think, a couple of years ago, started including the third gender. So, when you're filling up an application form of Delhi University, you can actually write male, female, or third gender. And but I don't know to what extent was it just a kind of a token,
Mm,
thing that you do.
mm.
Because last year we only had one application of a transgender person, just one amongst so many people that are out there. Um, Similarly, there's a fantastic story of the first transgender PhD holder in our country. Her name is Manomi Badopadhyay, and she's also the first transgender principal of a college in the country. And her story was very inspiring. But then when I followed up on her story, couple of months ago, 1 or 2 years ago, she resigned and she said that she was being harassed by students and other faculty member because of who she is. Thankfully, the state refused to accept her resignation and didn't let her go. And then now she's back as in that as principal. Now, so she becomes a role model for many transgender people. I think personally, I do believe that our colleges, our schools need to be places of change. They
Mm.
should be those safe spaces. So workplaces have so an office has a different purpose. But education and educational spaces should have a different purpose, and they should be talking about the rights of LGBT community and also be more inclusive towards the transgender population. So, what's your take on this? Education, educational institution, and transgender rights?
Good question. So my first thought is the title of my discussion with you today is beyond visibility in a lot of ways, right? What
Hmm.
to do next, like trans visibility also gets us harmed in a lot of ways. We don't talk about it. We in this country,
Yeah.
I'm not sure, and I think it may be a global way of recognition. We have a trans invisibility in this country.
I can't hear you. I think you've just covered the mouthpiece.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me?
Yeah, that's it. A little better. Yeah.
So there's days of
Yeah.
trans visibility, and a lot of what these issues are at educational institutions, having another box for trans people to check for third genders,
Right.
it's always just really been about our visibility. And my issue that
Hmm.
I take is, what about trans intelligence, right? What about having
Hmm.
trans people at educational institutions to kind of redirect the canon? The canon has been
Hmm.
canonized by white men for a very long time that are not trans,
Yeah.
cisgender. But what would it mean to also have an educational institution that centers the lived experience of a trans person and their wisdom
Hmm.
inside of an educational space? So as like
Yeah.
like a classroom. But a lot of
Hmm.
issues become about the visibility of a trans person, right? Are they real enough? Do they pass? Are they going to be seen as trans? Or are they going to be seen as an actual woman? And that's my issue. Like, stop focusing on our visibility and then talking about how intelligent we are. Because again,
Yeah.
about that, we do come with a lot of lived experience about both genders. I come with experience about what it was like to be that man that had so much privilege, that never had to get harassed on the street, really, for the most part, in a lot of ways. Now I'm understanding what it means to be catcalled constantly by men on the street, even in New York, right? There's a lot of that going on. Or when, again, everyone wants to views me and doesn't take my intelligence seriously. It's like it's a lot of mansplaining. A lot of men ask me constantly that the fact that they're right and I'm wrong, and I have to do this 2 or 3 times just to be believed. So now my experience, and I constantly have to I have to have more tenacity than I ever realized I would ever have to have.
Right.
But again, things aren't being talked about because it's only just about the visibility. And that's the people are falling in a lot of ways too, is that visibility will get us what we need. And visibility is, but what happens is a lot of trans visibility just gets us hurt. The more visible people, the more likely we are to be subject
vulnerable
to harassment. So and passing as a woman, so not even being seen as trans, but transitioning to the point where I'm not being seen as trans, erases transness in a lot of ways too for trans people. So that's the issue, is that I feel like educational institutions should 100,000% center trans people, should have more trans faculty members, should include people on syllabus and curriculum, to include knowledge in a lot of ways, because I feel like we are keepers of wisdom in a lot of ways as well. We have that natural knowledge. And that's my goal in life too, is eventually to become maybe a therapist, or to eventually enter an educational institution as a trans woman, to be able to have these conversations, to be able to redirect and actually to decolonize the canon, and to create educational atmospheres that allow folks to really invest in trans intelligence. I believe we have what we need to move beyond all of what we go through right now. I feel like trans people can template a future for ourselves in ways that cis people just don't know how to. I feel like we have so much lived experience on what it means to just figure out gender and ourselves. Like, I've had the hardest project ever. I've had to learn to recreate myself at the age of 25 or 26. And that was a huge project. I didn't have anyone else with me. I was lonely. I had to figure out how to embark on a transition by myself, for myself. And that's a project that I'm completely proud of, that allowed me to step into my own and step into my power. And I feel like I feel like educational institutions should acknowledge all of this. And because educational institutions are one of the most profound, how do I put it, institutions that reinforce legacies of colonialism. So for example, educational institutions teach people gender binaries, teach people what it means to be a woman, what it means to be a man. So a lot of educational institutions, once those are transformed and include trans people, a lot of what we'll see in society will start to also change. But until it happens in educational institutions, we won't see any effects in the real world, unfortunately.
Right. I completely agree with you. And well, I'm hoping that Delhi University comes up in forefront, and some of our colleges come up in, and forefront and take this task up, which is what you said, that we need to see transgender people as something more than just their bodies, and tap their intelligence and wisdom, which is what I am taking in from you right now. So I wanted your opinion on, in the last year, we had something called, which was projected by the government as a very empowering piece of legislation for the transgender community. It's called the Transgender Persons Protection Act 2019. I don't know if you've read about that or not.
Yeah, I've been reading about it.
Yeah, so we have many people, especially the transgender community, of course, has been not very happy about it. They've been very critical about it, and they've even protested against this piece of legislation. So I don't know if you could comment on it, if you've read enough about it to comment on it.
Sure, sure. No, I've done some reading, and already some reading is, producing very interesting responses from trans women in India specifically, and just trans people in India largely. And what I'm seeing is that, like, it's still a reversion. It's still going back to repression. Though, and this is the issue that I take, is a lot of laws when regards to trans people make it seem as though it's very progressive. It's a new thing, going to introduce new laws to protect us. But what it does in a lot of ways too, covertly, is harm us and reoppress us and re-trigger. So what this bill was doing was saying that in order to be trans, we'll recognize you for sure, but you have to have surgeries. You have to have gender reassignment surgery. And for a lot of trans people, that is not something that they want. You know what I mean? So it's still being tied back to genitalia, and that's the issue. It's like, this person, stop trying to figure out whether or not I have a male body part or a female body part. Stop focusing on genitalia, period. Think about it as just people and who need access to things. And that's still the issue, is that everyone is still wondering what genitalia we have, why we don't have that genitalia, why don't we have bigger breasts. And that's stop picking our bodies apart and starting to think about us as people who need certain things in order to survive. And that's not where we are, even in 2020. Like, when it's just like, also, what is the fixation, right? Why are we so fixated on trans people, like, and their bodies? Like, why? We are much more than our bodies. And again, I've mentioned intelligence. Part of what I do on my Instagram page is try to not show my body as much, but also create writing, because I think trans voices are as important, if not more, than our visibility. As a trans person, I'm also wanting to become a writer. And I feel like trans have a very tactful approach to kind of piecing together things that a lot of other people don't have. So that's what I'm saying. Like, I have the ability to read between the lines. I can pull apart and pick apart and then reassemble things to create new ways of knowing and new ways of thinking. And I feel like that's not what a lot of cis people who are legislators, who are also men, do. They're defining how we choose to define ourselves. They are still trying to, again, write us out of existence. Issue is that, let's say that this bill is passed and whatever, and we've had no issues about it. Well, what would happen is, in order to be trans, we've had to reassign our entire bodies, and in some ways that is a form of amnesia, and like it's for making us forget the fact that we were trans to begin with. And it's again legitimizing the fact that in order to be trans, you have to fully transition, and that's not what every trans person wants. And in some ways, that's the same thing that women have had issues with regards to laws about their bodies, not about abortion. What you decide, especially if you had, a child, a fetus that you necessarily don't want. What's your choice? You have a choice. It's all going back to bodies. And when it comes to trans women or women, period, we've seen, and this is where trans women and women need to stick together and not fight, and to come together, is it's still laws impacting our bodies at the end of the day. And that's not what women have wanted and women have pushed against. And there's been a lot of hoo-ha with women and the work that they've done to kind of change the narrative in the course of that forever. But what we're seeing is trans people still having to do that for ourselves. We're not having women stick with us who say, that's wrong, that's not something that should happen. And that's the issue too, is that it's only on us to kind of have to change the course of our lives. And that's a lot of work.
Right. Thank you so much, Alexandra. We have about 5 minutes left before Instagram cuts us off. I would have loved, I had a few more questions, but I think we're running short of time over here. Thank you so much for joining us, and your story has been so inspiring, so humbling, and I know for a fact that I have learned a lot of new things, things that I thought I was woke, but it looks like I've still been sleeping about so many issues that you have brought to fore. I think to really grasp the gravity and understand what you've said, I'm going to be revisiting this interview and hearing everything you said probably again, with my notebook and making some notes and
putting some points down, actually. Thank you so much. You're beautiful, and you're much more than that. You're so very intelligent and wise. Uh, and I wish you all the best. And people, you can follow Alexandra on her Instagram page because she puts up these wonderful posts that can, that can inform you so much about LGBT rights, trans rights, feminism, and she really brings the debate to the core in very succinctly, actually, in few words that you say, right?
I just say
So
thank you quickly too in response. You've been wonderful. I want to still be able to keep in touch. I think that's an amazing connection we have.
absolutely. So next time that you're in Delhi, let's meet up, and
Oh,
I think
totally.
we'd probably have this talk in person, and we'd love to have you over at KNC again.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Alexandra. Have a nice day.
You too. Bye bye.